Hello, everybody. Can see you rolling in. I'm excited to have you. We'll give everyone just a couple more seconds. I saw the waiting room before we started, and once we hit that number, I'll rock and roll. But while we're waiting, let's just double check that the chat is working correctly. So if you wouldn't mind just dropping what you're excited about in the chat, just so that we can make sure that everything is set up correctly before we get started. Okay, I don't think it is set up. Okay, I think I changed it, so we should be good there. Okay, there we go. We got it. Woohoo! Good. I'm glad we checked because I love to use this chat box throughout the presentation. So thank you so much for helping me get that all started. Okay, so here we are. I am Ryan. I am the clinical liaison and registered dietitian at Foodsmart. I've also been plant-based for just coming up on 11 years here. So it's one of my favorite topics to chat about. And I hope that with this presentation, you leave with a lot of practical tips, excited about eating more plants like fruits and vegetables and whole grains and all of that great stuff, which will get to later in this presentation. And some things that we'll touch on during this presentation are going to be the benefits of plant-based eating, some simple ways to get started, and also making it feel easy. So it's not something that you have to stress about or feel like you have to be perfect at doing. So you'll be able to walk away with some really applicable, doable things and tips to help you eat more plant-based foods. Before we get into the slides here, I just wanted to say a few housekeeping items. At the end of the presentation, I will do a Q&A, and if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom bar. You'll see there's a chat and Q&A. If you put the questions in the chat, they have the tendency to get buried, and I want to make sure I can get to all of your questions. So if you wouldn't mind just throwing them in the Q&A, that way when I'm going through at the end, I can see them all there, and then it's more likely that your question will get answered. So let's jump right in. So here are our goals for today and the objectives. So our goal for this session is to have a clear understanding of what plant-based eating looks like. And we also are going to cover some of the health benefits, key nutrients to pay attention to, and tips for building balanced meals, and some realistic, budget-friendly ideas to help you get started. And then I do just want to confirm, can you see the slides on the screen or are they not shared? Okay, you can see the slides. Perfect. Just wanted to make sure because I've got some cool graphics for you. Okay, so here we are. What is a plant-based diet? You may have seen this word tossed around. You may see it on products at the grocery store. You may see it online. But what does it mean? And it can mean a lot of different things depending on how it's interpreted. So when we're talking about plant-based in this context, we're talking about eating more plant-based foods. And I'll explain kind of what the plant-based umbrella is. So it's plant-based is kind of the overarching theme. And then below plant-based, there are more specific eating styles. So it could be a vegan diet, which has no animal products at all. It could be vegetarian, which includes dairy and eggs. It could be a flexitarian style of eating or approach, meaning mostly plants, but sometimes incorporating meat or fish, usually 5 to 10% of the time. So plant-based in the sense of everything is just a very broad umbrella term that can capture a lot of different meanings. So in this context, I'll lean more towards 100% plant-based, so no animal products, just so that you'll know, okay, this is what it would look like if I didn't have any animal products. But then, of course, you can feel free to make it your own and make it the process that it will look like for you because we're all different. We all have different preferences and It's important that you eat what's comfortable and what makes you feel confident too. So when we think of plant-based, sometimes you'll see it as an all or nothing type of mindset, or that you have to give up a lot of the things that you enjoy. But really, plant-based eating means focusing on specific foods that are really nutrient rich, that come from plant-based sources, and eating more of those versus the other types of products that are animal-based products or things of that nature. The key idea here is just to have more plants on your plate. So, what does that look like in terms of what is plant-based and what's not plant-based? On this slide here, I break down some plant-based foods and not plant-based foods. So, plant-based foods are going to be rich in fiber, vitamins, antioxidants. Think foods like vegetables, fruits, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, whole grains. These are all plant-based foods. If it comes from a plant and it's edible, it would classify as a plant-based food. A not plant-based food doesn't come from a plant, but comes from animals. You can think of things like meats, poultry, fish, dairy, eggs. This can also include animal byproducts, which would be things like gelatin, which you would find in like gummy candy or something that is gelatinous, or whey, which is milk protein. Those are all going to be animal byproducts. So, depending on what plant-based means to you, will determine whether or not you will include any animal-based products or just go fully plant-based and not include any animal-based products. The only diet here that is 100% plant-based is a vegan diet. So, I'm just throwing that out there for context too. So, if it's 100% plant-based, no animal products, no animal byproducts, that would be classified as vegan. So, just out of curiosity for the attendees here, is anyone currently following a plant-based diet? So, we've got that umbrella. And if so, do you have any specific categories that you classify or that you would fall into? Okay, we've got vegan life in the chat. We've got some plant-based eaters. We've got some vegans, flexitarian, mostly vegan. Okay, more vegans than I was expecting. Hello. But I'm also happy to have everyone who's excited about eating more plants. That is the main goal here. So awesome. So, why are people eating more plant-based foods and what is the draw to them? So, there's a lot of reasons why people choose to eat more plant-based items. There are three that are the most popular. So, if you ask anyone, typically the top three here, which are bracketed, are going to be the most common reasons why people choose to go plant-based. So, the top one, and as a dietitian, health is a great reason to eat more plant-based foods. As we know, food has a huge impact on our overall health, and many studies have shown that plant-based eating can support heart health, blood sugar control, weight, and digestion, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But with these very nutrient-rich foods, we're influencing our health with the choices that we're making. So that's a big factor for a lot of people. The second reason that people tend to eat more plant-based foods is for environmental concerns. So, not eating animal-based products reduces greenhouse gases, water use, and improves the overall health of our planet in terms of reducing those greenhouse gases from the production of meats and things from factory farms. They produce a lot of CO2. And then with all the animals in one place, they also produce a lot of CO2, especially ruminant animals like cows who have multiple stomachs. They just produce CO2 naturally, but when they're all together, it kind of creates a little bit of a balloon effect there. Another reason people choose to eat more plant-based foods and go plant-based is animal welfare. This is very popular, or the most common reason for people who are vegan. They tend to avoid animal products to avoid contributing to animal factory farming, which oftentimes leaves animals in not ideal conditions with little to no space, shortened lifespan, things of that nature in terms of care of the animal is one of the main reasons why people choose not to eat meat when they fall more towards vegan. But it can be a combination of all three. I always say I've been a vegan for coming up on 11 years, and I started being vegan for the environment, but then as time has progressed, it's a little bit of all of these. So it kind of uh, snowballs into something else. Some other reasons that people choose to be plant-based but might not be as popular are budget. So when looking at plant-based foods at their core, they are relatively inexpensive when you think of things like beans, rice, oats, frozen veggies. Typically, those are going to be more affordable in the grocery store than meat-based products. Another reason could be accessibility. So you don't have to have a specialty food store to eat plant-based. You can find all of the basics at a local grocery store. You can find the basics at even Dollar General. They have dried beans, they have canned goods, they have rice that's dried. So all of the essential basics can be found at any store. So it helps increase the likelihood of plant-based eating because it's so accessible. So I saw in the chat people were dropping some things, but I'm curious, what is your number one reason why you are either plant-based, vegan, or curious about eating more plant-based items? Health. Okay, yeah, health is good. And it makes sense because at Foodsmart, we are dietitians, and many of you probably see a dietitian to help with your health condition. So it makes perfect sense. So on the next couple slides, we're going to touch into the science-backed benefits of plant-based eating. So we're going to go over the health benefits, the different ways that plant-based eating can influence health. So these are just some overall health benefits, the overview, but then we're really going to break down each of these specific categories and touch on exactly what the research is showing and how plant-based eating benefits this. So we'll start with heart health. So heart health is one of the most prevalent diseases that we have here in the United States, and eating plant-based foods can have a powerful effect on heart health. Plant-based foods are naturally low in saturated fat for the most part and typically contain no cholesterol. Cholesterol only comes from animals. So we are animals, so we also produce our own cholesterol, but plant-based foods aren't going to have any cholesterol. So with a combination of being low in saturated fat and low in cholesterol, it's going to take some pressure off of our heart and blood vessels and to help help our heart beat a little bit better and improve our overall heart health. These foods are also rich in fiber, potassium, and antioxidants. And those are nutrients that help keep our blood vessels healthy and can reduce damage from inflammation or oxidative stress, which then can cause additional issues. Plant-based foods can also help lower our blood pressure and our LDL, which is also known as bad cholesterol. Both of the high cholesterol levels and high blood pressure are two of the biggest risk factors for heart disease. So over time, eating more plant-based foods has been linked to lower risk of heart disease and stroke. And since there are quite a few vegans in this presentation, you may have heard of Dean Ornish. He is a well-known and respected plant-based medical doctor, and he's done a lot of studies, numerous studies on the influence of whole food plant-based eating. So that type of eating also falls under the plant-based umbrella, but it includes no ultra-processed foods. It's really just the core plant-based foods. He has done lots of studies showing repeatedly that eating more plant-based foods or eating in that way helps improve heart health. I think when I was looking it up to prepare for this presentation, I think his earliest study goes back to like 1998, and he's been studying it since then, probably before then, but I think that was his first published paper. But he's been studying it for a really long time and has a lot of cool and interesting information about the plant-based diet and improving heart health. So when we're thinking about protecting our hearts long term, plant-based eating really gives us an advantage. Another benefit of plant-based eating is how it helps support blood sugar control. And foods that are high in fiber, like beans, lentils, whole grains, vegetables, slow down digestion. And that means that glucose enters your bloodstream at a more gradual rate, which helps stabilize blood sugar. So you're not getting a lot of those spikes and crashes from the more simple carbohydrates, but you're having a lot of fiber-rich foods, which is going to help stabilize blood sugar. Plant-based diets are usually built around whole foods that are also naturally low in added sugar and refined carbohydrates. And this is also going to help prevent big spikes and crashes. So eating more plant-based foods can help reduce insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is when your body doesn't respond as well to insulin. So improving that makes it easier for your body to use glucose properly. So over time, we'll see that eating more plant-based foods can lower your risk for developing type 2 diabetes. And it's not saying it's a cure-all. It's not saying only eat these foods, but incorporating more plant-based foods can or may help decrease the likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes. And for people who are already managing diabetes, plant-based eating has been shown to support better A1C levels. So when you get it checked every 3 months, that those lab values have also seen improvements. So whether you're looking on prevention or management of blood sugar, plant-based foods provide a powerful role and powerful tool in the blood sugar management. Okay, so weight management. This is another big topic for plant-based eating is healthy weight management. And this is great because there is no strict dieting or calorie counting. It's really just eating more plant-based foods. Typically, plant-based foods are going to be naturally lower in calories, but they're going to be higher in nutrients, like those antioxidants are going to be fiber rich. So you can typically eat larger portions of fruits and vegetables, but stay within your overall calorie needs. So there's really no need to count specific calories because you'll feel full quicker because of the fiber, or you'll feel more satisfied with the types of foods you're eating. I touched on fiber a little bit before, and this also helps aid in weight management because fiber helps keep you feeling full for longer, which can reduce cravings or reduce the likelihood of excess snacking or things of that nature because they are high in fiber, which is slowing down that digestion. So you're going to have that sense of satiety. This is also a great time to touch on adding more plant-based foods helps replace the high-fat animal products with leaner plant-based proteins. And this also may help people cut back naturally on excess calories and saturated fats because the plant-based proteins are going to be lower calorie than what animal-based proteins would be. And these foods are really satisfying, so it's enjoyable and it makes it easier to stick with long term as well, especially when looking at weight management. We want it to be something that's not quick and easy where you are stuck on this routine for only 4 weeks, then you get so tired of it, so bored, and you just want to eat something that tastes good and kind of go back to the foods that taste good because the 4 weeks were miserable and you didn't get to have anything you like. So this is a great way to help with weight management, but also still enjoying those foods that you might like. The the last specific one here is going to be for digestive health. And this is a really popular topic with plant-based foods because of fiber again. So fiber is kind of our hero here with plant-based eating, along with those antioxidants. But fiber doesn't just help with blood sugar and weight, it's also key for our digestive health. And plants are packed with both soluble and insoluble fiber, which is going to help keep our bowel movements regular. And plant-based foods are going to be the only foods with fiber. Animal-based foods don't have any fiber. So fiber is going to keep everything moving throughout our GI tract. And I'll touch on hydration in a couple slides, but I do want to mention if you're starting out eating plant-based foods, you're likely going to increase your fiber pretty quickly. And that can lead to constipation if you're not properly hydrated. It can also lead to gut-related issues, feelings of like bloating or cramping, because your gut's just not used to having that much fiber. So slow and steady wins the race. Increasing fiber by about 5 grams per day can be a gentler way to do a higher fiber diet than kind of just going from 20 to 60. It will give your gut a little bit of breathing room, you could say. So staying properly hydrated is important when increasing your fiber or eating more plant-based foods. You want to stay hydrated so that way everything can continue to flow. And I like to explain it in terms of like a kitchen sponge. So, if you have a kitchen sponge and there's no water on it, it's dry, it's very hard. You can't move it. It kind of cracks a little bit, but you really can't twist and turn it. But when you add water to the sponge, now all of a sudden you can twist it, it fits in glasses, and it's really, really malleable. I like to explain stool that way in terms of fiber. So without water, your stool is kind of like a hard kitchen sponge, but when you add water to it, it becomes a more malleable, easier to move type of stool. So over time, you will see a reduction in bloating and improved digestion with fiber, especially if you start slow and increase your way up. Fiber also acts as a prebiotic, which is what feeds the good gut bacteria in our gut. So then we can have a nice, healthy gut microbiome with those good gut bacteria. Having a healthy gut is also tied to a stronger immune system and even helps with mood support. So, by eating a wide variety of plant-based foods, you can create a diverse gut microbiome, which is linked to better health overall. So, whether we're looking at beans, veggies, whole grains, any plant-based food that's going to be high in fiber, you're not just feeding yourself, but you're also feeding that good gut bacteria. The last condition I'll touch on here is kind of broad. It's chronic conditions, which can be a lot of things, even some of the things I've already mentioned. But there is a research that shows that people who are eating more plants have lower risks of heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and even some cancers. That's because the plant-based foods are antioxidant rich and have anti-inflammatory compounds, which are protecting our cells from damage and that oxidative stress. So there are things called free radicals, which are wild molecules that are rummaging around trying to create damage. When we have high antioxidants, they are the shield that's protecting our cells from this wild molecule trying to create damage. So we want very high antioxidants, and to know whether something is high antioxidant, I'll touch on later. Ooh, when we get to fruits and veggies, I'll touch on it. So these are some of the key benefits of plant-based eating. Okay, so we'll move on to the plant-based food groups because they're going to look a little bit different. So we'll start with fruits and veggies. I didn't keep you waiting too long to talk about the antioxidants. So fruits and veggies are going to be the foundation of a plant-based diet. These should make up the largest portion of your meals. When we were looking at the previous slides, you saw the benefits of plant-based eating, which can largely be attributed to a good amount of these fruits and veggies. And they are truly endless options to pick from here, whether it's fresh fruit or veggies, frozen, canned, all of them can be incorporated to increase the total amounts of fruits and veggies per day. One thing to keep in mind if you are buying canned or frozen is just to look for no added salt if you have heart health conditions or if you're at high risk for negative heart health outcomes. And then for canned fruits is to choose fruits that are in their own juice instead of in syrup, which is going to be high fructose corn syrup, which is an added sugar. And most of the time, fruits don't need extra syrup or added sugar to them because they're already naturally sweet. And what makes these so antioxidant rich, or how you can identify if these are antioxidant rich per se, is the color. So when you see a fruit or a vegetable that is vibrant in color, so for example, this I think looks like a mango, possibly, or like these here, or like this, or bright orange, deep purple, bright green, all of these colors that are bright that your eyes are like, ooh, or like this dragon fruit, really vibrant colors typically indicate higher antioxidant content. So if we're looking at red fruits or red vegetables, that's going to typically have something called lycopene, which is a very well-studied antioxidant that's going to help protect our cells. So anything that is naturally bright, vibrant, would be something that's going to have antioxidants. And I know I've been watching this forager online, And typically, when foraging, if something is bright and vibrant, that means it's poisonous. That is not the case for foods that you find at the grocery store. Those are going to be more antioxidant rich. So don't use that method if you are foraging for any reason. But if you are at the grocery store, this is a perfect method. So that's going to be fruits and veggies. It's going to make up the foundation of plant-based eating. 50% of your meal should be some type of fruit or vegetable. The next item here is going to be protein. I know this is a very hot topic, a common question. I hear this a lot with plant-based eating, but the truth is that there are plenty of plant-based protein sources. And when making your meals, you want to aim to have about a quarter or 25% of your meal to be some type of plant-based protein. These are plant-based proteins are important to help maintain muscle mass, build muscle, and this can also help keep you feeling full for longer, similar to protein. You want to aim to eat a variety of different proteins. So in this image here, we've got some tofu, we've got some red lentils, we've got some beans, we've got some peas, all different kinds of plant-based proteins, some chickpeas. You want to aim to have a variety of different proteins because they're going to give you different nutrients and amino acids that your body needs. So we've got options like beans, lentils, tofu, tempeh, soy milk, nut seeds. All of these are going to be great sources of plant-based protein, and they're also delicious. So in the next couple slides, I'll highlight what more about plant-based proteins because I know there's lots of questions here. So I want to touch on some complete versus incomplete proteins and just clear up some confusion around protein. So some plants are complete proteins, meaning that they have all 9 essential amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins that our bodies can't make on our own. These are going to include foods like tofu, tempeh, edamame, quinoa, hemp seeds, chia seeds, nutritional yeast. Those are all going to have all 9 essential amino acids. Incomplete proteins are going to be missing one of the 9 that our bodies can't make. But that doesn't mean that you have to only eat complete proteins. The key here is to make sure that throughout your day, you have a variety of different proteins. So that way in your day, you're not missing any of those amino acids. And there has been an update. Long ago, there was some media that had come out. It was like long ago, maybe 15 years, that you had to pair proteins together to make them complete. But that is no longer true. They've debunked that in multiple studies. You don't have to pair incomplete proteins to make them complete, as long as you're eating a variety of plant-based proteins throughout the day. So examples of how to make it complete in the day. So if you had let's say beans for lunch, beans are missing one of the 9 essential amino acids. You could have rice at the end of the day because rice has the missing amino acid that beans don't have. So in the day, now you have all the amino acids you need because you've had a variety of different foods. So examples of plant-based proteins with their amounts. So here we'll look to see the plant-based protein, the serving size, and then grams of protein. So we have tempeh. How many of you have tried tempeh before, just out of curiosity? Okay, we've got some people. Follow-up question, did you like it if you've had it? Some people like it, some people don't like it. So I'm curious okay, so some people liked it, some people did not. Tempeh is a fermented soy product, and it's similar to tofu in the sense that it's a soy product, but they are very different in terms of taste and texture. So one of my favorite tips for tempeh is if you feel like it's bitter because it is fermented, so it has some of those bitter compounds to it. One of the best tips I've ever tried is taking the tempeh, chopping it however you want it, whether it's cubed or if you want to slice it or keep it in its block form, and then put it into boiling water. When you boil it, it takes away some of that bitter flavor to it. So if you didn't like it, that could be a way to try it again if you wanted to. It's an awesome plant-based protein, and you can do so many things with it. Even just Googling tempeh recipes, or if you have a Foodsmart dietitian, asking, hey, do you have any recipes for tempeh? They might be able to help you with that too. But that's a great plant-based protein, one of my favorites. Another protein is tofu. Tofu goes from soft to super firm. So depending on what your preference is, may depend on what type of tofu you like. And tofu can be tricky to get right and sometimes just tastes like a wet sponge. Um, but the proper preparation for tofu really makes a difference. So if it's firm to extra firm, you want to press the tofu with you could do it with a plate on the bottom because it's going to release the water because it's set in water. So you're going to put a plate under it, put your block of tofu. You can either wrap it in a tea towel or paper towels, and then put a plate on top of it, stack some canned goods on there, and it's going to press out that liquid. When you press out the liquid, then it can absorb flavor. If it's just full of water and you try to flavor it with seasonings and things, or if you try to do like a light olive oil on it, it's full of water, so it's not going to take on any of the flavor. So it can taste not as ideal, but pressing it really helps. Super firm tofu is my number one recommendation for people who are starting out because it is way easier to cook and it's way faster. You don't have to press it and it takes on a lot of flavor. It also is going to be the highest protein tofu. So the more it's pressed, the more protein it is. So soft tofu is going to have less protein than a super firm tofu. We also have foods like beans, lentils, soy milk, pumpkin seeds. Those are all great options. And I saw in the chat someone said Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's does have a super firm tofu. That is the best one. So if you have a Trader Joe's, highly recommend. Okay, so let's talk about meat alternatives. So what are meat alternatives? Are they healthy? Should you have them? How often? What does this look like? This is a very common question. So meat alternatives, they are becoming more popular. You may have seen them on the grocery store or online. I like to view these as transition foods if you're just starting out. If you miss the flavor of meat, but you're like, I don't really want to eat hamburger, these are a great option for that. They have been doing more renditions of these products because of consumer demand. So Beyond has redone theirs to their gold, which is, I think, their third rendition, and then Impossible has created a light version. Those are the ones that I typically would recommend if going this route because they're going to be lower in saturated fat, which is one of the issues with the alternative meats, and also sometimes red meats can be comparable to the amount of saturated fat, if not higher than some of these products. So with these products, I like to look at them too as not something that you'd have every day, but you can have them in what way it fits in your lifestyle, whether it's once a week, twice a week, every other week, once a month, kind of whatever your nutrition goals are specifically, these can fit in some way. And sometimes highly processed foods can be high in added salt, added fat, but they can be a good choice depending on what your specific goals are because they are, as you'll see in the next slide, a little bit lower or a little bit more nutritious in some areas than standard ground beef. So on this slide here, I compare Beyond Gold with an organic beef that's 93% lean. So the squares that are yellow here, so saturated fat, these have 5 grams of saturated fat, which is 25%, which is still high in saturated fat. Anything over 20% is going to be high in saturated fat. However, when you compare it to the beef, it's 1 gram less or 5% less when you look at the daily value of saturated fat. So if saturated fat was something that you had a concern about, this could be a way to reduce that by a gram or to reduce the total fat by quite a bit here. The Beyond Meat also doesn't have any trans fat. This does have 1 gram of trans fat. When looking at cholesterol, cholesterol is something of concern. Beyond Meat, because it's a plant-based product, doesn't have any cholesterol, whereas the beef would have cholesterol. Sodium, the Beyond is going to be higher, or meat alternatives are going to be higher than the ground beef here. When we look at fiber, the Beyond Meat has a little bit of dietary fiber, 7%. And then beef, since it's an animal-based product, doesn't have any fiber in it. Just animal-based products don't have any fiber. And then we look at protein, pretty comparable in terms of grams per protein. And this is for 112 grams, 113 grams, so very comparable in the comparison here. And this would be per container. I will just point out that this label comes from the burgers that come in two. So just looking at the label for one patty is comparable to this one. All right. So micronutrients. What micronutrients should you look at when you are thinking of eating more plant-based foods? So we're going to focus on iron, B12, calcium, and omega-3s. And I do want to mention too that any diet can be healthy if you plan for the nutrients. And there's really no difference between plant-based eating, nutrients, and then general nutrients. We all should focus on eating more nutrients, whether it's iron. We have a huge prevalence of iron deficiency. I think when I looked at the stats, it was like 30% worldwide of people have iron deficiency, which is more than just plant-based eaters. So it's something across the board that we should be looking at. B12 is going to be more specific for plant-based eaters, but still is important across the board. Calcium, it can come from fortified plant milks. That's one of the best ways to get it. Tofu, set in calcium. Not all tofu will have it, so you'll want to check the label. Leafy greens and then almonds also are going to be good sources of calcium. And then omega-3s, this is going to be in the form of ALA, which converts to DHA. And these will be items like flax, chia, hemp seeds, walnuts, and then you can get the levels tested. So if it's something of concern, speaking with your provider about a possible supplement that's algae-based would be a route you could take. For non-plant-based eaters, that's typically what fish oil is for. It's going to have omega-3s, but if you are plant-based and avoiding animal products, it would be algae-based. So these are key nutrients and kind of what their important things are, important categories. Okay, so next part of your food or your plate per se will be whole grains. So whole grains are high in fiber. They help maintain energy levels. They keep us full for longer, promote healthy bowel habits. You want to aim to choose whole grains like brown rice, whole wheat bread, whole wheat tortillas, quinoa, oats. Those are all going to be whole grains. And when shopping for products, when you go to the grocery store, or if you're at home and you have some grain products, you want to look for this stamp here. Sometimes it's not like a sticker. It's it's printed onto the packaging. But if you look for this, it will tell you that the product is whole grain through the Whole Grain Council. This is also a great website, wholegraincouncil.org. It has a whole list of different whole grains from A to Z. They're all plant-based and really fun to cook with. So if you like cooking or like trying new foods or seeing new recipes with whole grains, it's a great resource to utilize. So these will take up a quarter of your plate. So just a recap here, we've had our fruits and veggies take up 50%, our proteins take up a quarter of our plate, and then the other quarter is going to be these whole grains. So that's our completed plate. But there is one thing we'll add to the top of it, which will be a tablespoon of healthy fat. That is our heart healthy fat recommendation. These are going to be unsaturated, which come from sources like olive oil, avocados, nuts. Those are going to be items to add. You could do whole avocado too, whole nuts. It doesn't have to be in the form of a liquid. You could do olives as well. Those have some healthy fats. To know whether it's a healthy fat or a less healthy fat, you can look at if it's solid at room temperature. If it's solid at room temperature, that means it's a saturated fat, which would be something you want to eat less often. And if you have heart health issues, that would be something to potentially avoid depending on what you and your practitioner have decided. So fats are important because they play a huge role in our brain health, maintaining cognitive function, and many studies have shown or found that omega-3s help increase learning, memory, cognitive well-being, and even blood flow to the brain. And I did see the coconut oil question, which is a great question. So coconut oil will be a saturated fat. It's a little odd because sometimes it does go liquid, but when looking at it at a molecular level, it's a saturated fat. So that would be something to avoid more than you use. Like I wouldn't use it as an everyday oil because it is so high in saturated fat, even though it is plant-based. Okay, so that is the importance of fat. So we have our whole plate done, and the next part is a drink. So we will have some water. And I apologize if you've done any webinar with me before, but you know my favorite slide is the water slide because I like to say we usually are busy and forget to drink our water. So if you have water near you, go ahead, pause. Let's take a water break and take a sip and work on our hydration for the day. So when looking at hydration, it's important to maintain proper hydration. We talked about the importance of having proper hydration with fiber, especially in plant-based eating. That's one of the huge benefits to hydration when looking specifically at plant-based eating. But then for overall health, proper hydration helps with our metabolism, decreasing inflammation. It supports our muscles and our joints. So drinking enough water through the day and limiting sugary drinks and excessive caffeine can really help our bodies overall because we're made up of a large percentage of water. Okay, so wrapping it all up in our plate here. So this is what a vegan plate looks like. You might have seen this in my plate. This is my vegan plate. So it's a rendition on that from the Vegetarian Resource Group. So this is a group of plant-based dietitians or vegan dietitians, and it's my plate, but made for vegans. So it's kind of what we touched on today. You've got 50% fruits, veggies, whole grains, protein, and then calcium, which we touched on as one of the important nutrients, but also water and hydration. I will throw in here if you have any questions about your specific diet, you want to have like really specific individual questions answered, you can meet with a Foodsmart registered dietitian to get all of those questions answered, to be able to get really personalized advice based on what your specific goals are. So you can get started for as low as $0, depending on what your insurance plan is. And you can go to www.foodsmart.com/schedule to get set up and see if you qualify. Okay, so how are we going to do this? How are we going to eat more plants? So the tip here is to get started and get started small. So you can try one plant-based meal per day or a few times per week, looking at your overall schedule. Like, what can you do? Ask yourself, what could I do this week? And give it a try. There's a really good resource. It's called Meatless Monday. They have a challenge. So if you like to feel challenged or kind of like a competition with yourself, that could also be a really great way to get started, just reducing meat on one day of the week. Another good tip here is mix and match. So combining foods. So for example, do half ground beef, half lentils in tacos or chili or spaghetti. That way you're cutting your meat consumption by 50%. Maybe next time you went, wasn't bad. I'm going to do 100% lentils, or I'm going to add lentils in black beans, or I'm going to get creative and try tofu and crumble that up with lentils, and kind of just having a lot of fun in the kitchen with a new recipe based on a recipe that you already like. So using what you know too, instead of reinventing the whole wheel, taking a meal that you love, like the tacos or chili or spaghetti or something like that, and just make it into a plant-based rendition of that exact same meal. You don't have to reinvent the entire menu of what you already eat. Kind of just making those substitutions or swaps to make the meal more plant-based. Stocking up on staples is really important because if you don't have things on hand, you're not likely to use them. So think of things that you would want to use or like to use, whether it's beans, frozen veggies, whole grains, tofu. All of those are great to have on hand. And tofu can be frozen too. So even just those freezer staples are great. And then don't be afraid to flavor your food either, especially with like veggies or tofu, just like you would do for animal-based proteins. You still want to season and give flavor to the plant-based proteins too. They're a vessel for flavor. here are some easy swaps. So for milk, ground beef, chicken, eggs, here are some plant-based options for swapping them out. And then a grocery list, which can be used from Dollar General all the way to a specialty store. All of these are staples for plant-based eating. You can find them everywhere, and they're great just to keep on hand. For pantry staples as well, I made this list so that you can just see some common things for pantry freezer to kind of go along with that grocery list, things to keep on hand that you can use. And then when eating out, these are just some quick tips. Well, we want to eat out at a limited amount. Typically, eating out has higher sodium, saturated fat, the types of things that we're looking to avoid. It's not realistic to say never eat out again. So if you're going to eat out, and when you do eat out, it's good to know how to do it. So looking for those veggie forward options, customizing your meal, asking for swaps, calling the restaurant ahead of time when they're not busy is one of my favorites to see. If they're able to accommodate, looking at the menu, figuring out what you could make if it's not super like vegan friendly. Another good resource is Happy Cow. So these are restaurants that are easy to make plant-based choices. Happy Cow is an app you can get, and it's pulls up whether a restaurant is completely vegan, if you can have plant-based options, and it shows you what people have ordered in the past. And it's kind of like a forum, so you can see what you might be able to order from places, which works really well when you're not at home or if you're just starting out and you're like, I don't know any place around here. So those are all really good resources. And then to close this out here, I wanted to just quickly debunk some myths here. Is it expensive? The answer, no. Plant-based eating, as we've seen today, is not too expensive. There are a lot of staples that are relatively affordable. It can be expensive buying specialty items or buying the prepackaged, more fancy types of items, but at its core, plant-based eating is really relatively inexpensive. Protein. Can we get enough protein? Yes, you can get enough protein from eating plant-based foods. There are so many different plant-based proteins, which we have seen today. And one of the myths is that you can't get enough protein eating only plants, but you definitely can. Not enough variety. A myth, it's boring. Plant-based eating, boo, boring. What we know now, plant-based meals are colorful, flavorful, and they can be very diverse. I'll wrap us up with some resources that I love. So we've got some books, some websites, and some apps. These are all great, whether you're just starting out with plant-based eating or whether you've been vegan or plant-based for quite a while. These are all great resources. So we'll move into some questions. Okay. Okay. So feel free to drop any additional questions that you've had. Yeah. Let me go back one. There it is. Okay, here's a question. How do acai bowls rank in terms of sugar slash nutritional content? So with acai bowls, it kind of depends where you get it from. If it is something that you're getting from the freezer section at the grocery store, you can always check the nutrition facts panel. And if it has more than 20% of the added sugar next to it, then that means it's going to be high in added sugar, which you would put back, or you could have for like a dessert or something. And another thing to look at that too, there are pre-made packets. You can even make them at home to help reduce that amount of added sugar. We're looking specifically for added sugar, not sugars. So there'll be like sugars and then below that indented added sugar. You're looking for added sugar, which means they have been put in by the manufacturer to gear towards what our taste buds like, which is sugar. So that is what I would look at, just the nutrition facts label. And if it's too high, you can always make them at home. Or you can even do just like a fruit smoothie, but add less liquid to it and it'll be thick like an acai bowl and is really great. this question says, is it true that you shouldn't eat chia seeds dry? I haven't heard that in my experience. I've eaten chia seeds dry. There's no research that I know of that says you shouldn't eat them dry. When you add them to liquid, it does change the texture of it. So they are a soluble fiber, so they're going to get soluble and they kind of turn into a gel. So it might be more tasteful if you like the texture of that. If you don't like the texture of that, then eating them dry is a-okay. Okay, what is your recommendation with eating tofu and estrogen-like compound concerns? How much can we eat of it? That's a really great question and a very common question. So with tofu, it does have phytoestrogen, which sounds a lot like estrogen, but the research that has been published hasn't shown large concerns. It shows protective nature for estrogen, for breast cancer specifically. They've done a lot of research on that, especially in Asian communities. They looked at the amount of tofu that they were eating and the incidence of breast cancer, which is relatively pretty low. So there's no big concerns of tofu and the phytoestrogen that it has in it, and it's a little bit different than actual estrogen. Repeat. Oh, yes, I can repeat the portions. So let me go back to that slide. I think this is what you're referencing for the portions. So you've got 50% of your plate is fruits and vegetables, a quarter, or yeah, a quarter, 25% whole grains, 25% to a quarter is plant protein. We've got calcium at the top or hydration. Awesome, awesome. What is your recommendation on using plant-based protein? What are brands that you recommend, or what should we look for when choosing plant-based protein powders? So when looking at plant-based protein powders, it depends how often you're going to use it. If you're using a daily protein powder, I typically recommend something that's a little bit more simple with the ingredient list, especially in terms of like specific gums, particularly carrageenan or like gum, or if there are sugar alcohols in it, mostly because the research of those specific items, they're not bad, but the research shows when you have them repeatedly, so 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days in a row, that's when they start to see negative implications for our gut specifically, and they change our gut microbiome with repeated use. So if you're having them every once in a while, there's no real indication there. But for a daily protein powder, I typically recommend something that's a little bit more simple. There are a lot of options out there. So in terms of like recommendations, there's Drink Wholesome is a good one, or Gain Simple is a good one. Truvani is another good one that don't have a lot of ingredients, but they also don't have that chalky type of texture or flavor that you might get. Um, so hopefully that helps. Uh, Let me do a couple more here. What are plant-based options to replace red meat? Uh, so to replace red meat, if you are if you're cooking a steak, it would be kind of hard, but we'll say ground beef because that's a little bit easier for replacing in the sense of plant-based eating. And I like to do tofu is always great, crumbled up, flavored. And you can also add a dark bean with it. So a black bean, a kidney bean, green lentils, anything darker has a flavor that's closer to mimic red meat or like ground meat, ground beef particularly. You wouldn't want to use, or you could use chickpeas and like white beans, but typically I like to use those to replace like chicken. So if you're making like a chicken salad or like a tuna salad, white beans work better for that than like a black bean. You wouldn't make like a chicken salad with a black bean, it wouldn't taste right, but you could use a black bean for ground beef. Oh, mushrooms are a good one. Mushrooms don't have much protein. I think they have like 1 gram of protein for a pretty large serving, so it adds the umami flavor to it. So you would still need to add another plant-based protein to it, but definitely mixing those in can give it more of that umami flavor. Also, tomatoes have a lot of umami too. Good questions. Um, coconut milk preferable? It could be depending on what you're using it for. If it's fortified is really what you're looking at. So if it's a fortified coconut milk, then that could be a-okay. You're looking for fortification in calcium specifically. That's really like the main one, but sometimes it'll have other fortifications too, with like B vitamins. Those can be more preferable. Coconut milk doesn't have protein either, so it depends kind of what you're using it for. If you are looking to replace milk, you'll want to go more with like a soy base or pea base because soy has 7 grams protein, pea has 8 grams protein, and cow's milk has 8 grams protein. So they're all pretty comparable up there, but coconut milk doesn't have as much. Mhm. Oh, mushrooms. Okay, I answered the mushroom question. Perfect. And we'll do two more questions here. There's still a couple questions about how much protein do we really need per day. And for plant-based eaters, the recommendation is zero point 0.9 grams of protein per kilogram. It could go from zero point 0.9 grams to 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. It's a little bit of math there, but let me type it in the chat so then you can see it there. 0 point 0.9 grams to 1 gram, zero point 0.9 to 1 gram per kilogram. And to find your kilograms, we use weight in the US. You just divide your weight by 2.2. Okay, and then the last question I'll answer here, someone had a question about how to schedule the Foodsmart dietitian. And you can go to this site here, foodsmart.com/schedule, and then that will be a way that you can get set up with a registered dietitian. We do have a wide variety of dietitians. I think they're all great, being a former Foodsmart dietitian. So I am really excited for you to meet with them and continue your plant-based eating journey. So I think that is a majority of the questions are kind of similar here, but I am so glad that you all were able to attend today. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out. This will be sent out, the recording will be sent out to you probably by the end of the week. I am not sure when our marketing team will get it out, but we'll definitely get it out to you and happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you so much for coming.